Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we have two awesome guests. This is, I think, like my first time I've ever had two people, which is really awesome. We have Doug and Kasper from Euler, and yeah, they're gonna walk us through their new product, the EVC. Yeah, would love to kind of just find out. So I had Michael on with you guys a while back. How did you guys make the pivot into doing so? EVC stands for Vault, like what Euler Vault Connector. How did you guys make this
Ethereum Vault Connector?
Yeah. Ethereum? Okay. How did you guys make this pivot? What was sort of the leading into it? I guess what was the need that you guys saw whenever you were making it?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us, Nick. I guess our hand was sort of forced, obviously, because there was the hack of Euler earlier in the year. But it did give us a little bit of chance to step back and kind of analyze what we're doing, kind of from first principles, and determine, okay, if since we have this like kind of rare opportunity to start from scratch, what would we do? Given the current landscape of lending and Ethereum and the trends we see. And also all the like kind of mistakes and things we regretted about the V1 system, right? That we would have improved upon. Yeah, sorry for jumping and correcting you about the Ethereum thing, but we kind of think of it as like a public good, right? That's why we gave it the name Ethereum rather than trying to focus on the Euler, because we do hope to build an ecosystem around it, but we really think this is like a public good kind of thing that many people could build on if they're so inclined.
Cool. So I mean, Euler V1. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was the basics that I got out of my deep dive. There was it was a lending protocol, but you guys had some interesting math around the liquidations where you were capping some stuff, and it seemed very much more efficient and a little bit better than a lot of the other protocols, and you guys were doing great. Did you guys see a lot of interactions with kind of vaults around that time, or people wanting to do that?
Yeah, I would say so. Like you say, Euler V1 was, kind of, we took the example of compound and said, okay, if we started this fresh and did it better, and improve upon all these other ideas we have, what's the result? And yeah, like we said, we had, Dutch auctions and liquidations, which are like, kind of more fair for the person being liquidated and generally more efficient in a couple ways. A bunch of projects do that now, by the way, but we were one of the first to kind of do it at scale. And then we also had, this concept of borrow factors in addition to collateral factors, so that you could also like evaluate independently the risk of the borrowed asset instead of just the collateral asset. And we also had sub accounts so that, one EOA can have multiple different positions. And there's, quite a few other innovative features, I guess. Yeah. Anything you want to add here, Kasper?
No, but Nick mentioned about the vaults and why we decided to go this way. So in fact, in V1, we realized that, there is a community which would like maybe Euler to be compatible with ERC 4626 standard. So we observed that there were some projects who created their own wrappers on top of Euler, which would be compliant with the standard, and kind of, whole space is going in that direction. So we decided just to adopt it and use it.
Cool. Well, yeah. Well, let's jump into it. I mean, first, whichever one you guys want. Can you guys explain for people that don't know what's a vault, real fast? We can kind of draw it out. So
sure. Yeah, vault is just a smart contract that the idea is that you put your asset in, and later on you can take it out, hopefully with a positive yield, right? So it's like you can kind of think of it as an investment. I don't know that that's the right legal terminology to think of it or whatever, but it basically just holds your assets, hopefully keeps them safe, hopefully earns you yield, right? And it's kind of just a generic term for any contract that does that. But because there's a lot of advantage in standardizing interfaces, as we've seen with ERC20, right? Tokens really took off when the ERC20 standard came out. I'm talking back in the dawn of the Ethereum, right? But the fact that every token implements like a balance of method is really powerful, because everything just works together, right? You only have to write one token integration and it can work with anything, right? So that's where this emerging standard, I mean, I guess it's pretty established now, but ERC 4626 defines the interface for vaults, right? It kind of figures out like the common interface that you need for any sort of contract that implements what I said earlier, right? Like a contract where you put money in, earn yield, take it out again later, right? That's how I would describe a vault.
So like this would be like, if I could explain it really simply, it would be like it holds a bunch of assets. So it's sort of like a multi-sig in some ways. You would put in, say, like steth, USDC. I don't know what's another asset that would be normally in a vault.
So yeah, the general concept of vault, I would say you're right. But I think 4626 actually depends on one deposited asset.
Only one. So there's only one in here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, different strategies could, swap into other assets and hold them as part of the vault, right? Like if we're talking the general concept of a vault, because a lot of vaults will actually take your deposit and do something with them, right? Like maybe purchase some other yielding tokens and hold them in the vault on your behalf. But there is one like designated special quote unquote underlying asset in the 4626 vaults. Yeah.
Okay. So this one, let's say this is like an ETH vault. Participants would put it in, and then they could go and put it into a lending protocol. It's the general idea here. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the vault might purchase LP tokens from like Uniswap or Curve or whatever. Like the specification is pretty loose about what it actually does with it.
And then there's this idea of what is it, a controller in the vault, or is that? So
now let's if you want to jump into kind of our concept of it, away from just like the general purpose concept of a vault. What we like to kind of think of as the difference between what we've done and like the normal conception is that our vaults are passive, right? So that underlying asset lives inside the vault. And the vault itself isn't coded with any sort of strategy to reinvest those tokens or anything like that, right? It just sits there and waits for someone who wants to come and borrow those assets to take them out, right? And then later on, they'll have to pay back what they borrowed plus a little bit extra, the interest, right?
So this would be for any user could come in and deposit. So let's see, what would be a generic example would be like they want to put it in and then they're going to go LP on Uni, or would that be a standard one?
Yeah, that for sure. In a normal 4626 vault, the vault
or for EVC. I mean, what's the target use case for EVC? I guess is this Euler?
Got it. So yeah, like normally there's two sides to the market, right? You have people that come and put into the vault, and then typically it's other people that come and take it out of the vault. And yeah, like you say, there might be all kinds of reasons to borrow something. You could be depositing Uniswap. I would say that the most typical example is that you redeposit it into another vault, right, to use as collateral for the borrow. But yeah, like I guess we'll get to that when we get to the controller aspect. But if you look at Compound, Euler One, Aave, a lot of what people do is they create leverage positions, right? And the idea behind that is that you borrow something from one vault, put it into another vault to collateralize it, right? So you have like an outsized liability and collateral relative to what you started with. Yeah, that's kind of the typical use case.
Okay, so
maybe to clarify here, it would be good to mention that the ERC 4626 standard itself, it does not define how the yield is generated, right?
Right.
In fact, it only defines the interface for depositing, withdrawing, reading balances, and that's it, right? And how the yield is generated is in fact up to the developer of this vault, right? So in most use cases, you would have active vaults which take those deposits and deposit them somewhere else in order to generate that yield. And with our concept and the EVC, what we can do is we can enable borrowing for those vaults, which was not possible before because vaults, they are standalone entities, right? And you need to have some kind of communication layer between them in order to enforce rules. For example, to enforce that the user is properly collateralized in order to borrow something from your vault.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say, so in an EVC vault, we'll have these people, or it would be, you could have multiple people, right, deposit into the vault. And then here, and then they'll deposit their ETH, and then these people here want to go deposit it into a normal vault that's going to do some strategy, right? This could potentially be.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Yeah. So one of the great things about the EVC is that you could have different vaults, like different vaults implementations created by different people, and they can all sort of interact, right?
Right.
Let's just if we just focus on one vault for now. I think a good way to explain like the fundamental problem is about like our passive vault concept. Imagine someone comes and deposits the ETH, puts into this vault, right? And then someone else comes and borrows that ETH out, right? What's actually enforcing that they'll pay it back, right? There's nothing at this stage, right? If it's just one isolated vault, then they could just walk away, right? And there'd be no way that they would ever repay it, right? In the kind of like anonymous trust minimized model of the blockchain, right? So in order to solve that, lending protocols have this concept of collateral, right? Where if you do want to take out a borrow from this vault, there has to be some way that vault can go and recover your funds, right? It can be what we call seize or liquidate the collateral that you've posted, right? Yep. So the concept of EVC is that in order to borrow from the vault on the right, you need to put funds into the vault on the left and connect them together, right? So that vault on the right knows that it can go to the vault on the left to seize your collateral, right?
So these people here, they would put USDC into this vault as collateral, right? And if they wanted to borrow the ETH, and then this one is sort of passively linked, you would say?
Exactly, yes. We don't actually use that term passively linked, but like they're connected, I guess we say,
connected.
Right? Yeah, the EVC is the connector. That's where the C comes in, Ethereum Vault Connector. So it manages that association, right? That these people have borrowed from this, and what they've posted as collateral to secure that borrow is the USDC over there. Yeah, exactly right.
Right. Okay. So then the EVC, I guess, so as we'll just go through the classic example of, you borrowed $1,000 worth of ETH, you put in $1,200 worth of USDC. Now all of a sudden, the price changes to where, the collateral is not enough to cover the ETH that you've borrowed, right?
Yes.
What would happen?
Exactly. And that could be the ETH going down or the USDC going up in price. Other way around. Yeah. Your liability going up in price or your collateral going down in price. Either that could impact the health of your position, right?
Yeah.
Well chosen numbers, because exactly as you say, the collateral has to be worth more than the liability, right? That's what we call over collateralized lending. If it ever gets below that, like if your collateral becomes less than liability, then there's no incentive for you to pay it back, right? Because
you'll walk away.
You'd actually be better off if you just walked away, right? So that's why it's important to maintain this over collateralization. And typically to leave a little bit of breathing room, the liquidations will actually happen before it reaches equal value, right? So in your case, maybe if the value of your collateral goes down to 1,100 against your 1,000 liability, then maybe it would be seized.
And would sort of these, I'm guessing, so whenever you borrow it, would you have to set a custom collateralization ratio, or would that be sort of set by the vault? Whenever you,
it's set by the vault, yeah. So the nice thing about the EVC is that it leaves a lot of that discretion up to the vault that's being borrowed from, right? Yep. So the vault that is being borrowed from can set its own policies, right? It could have just a simple collateralization ratio. It could have something a little more complicated. It can get pricing from different sources as it sees fit. It's really up to
be the Oracle. The Oracle would be an input here, as far as.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the really nice property of this EVC is the fact that what we call controller vault, which is the liability vault, which is that ETH vault in your case, it can do whatever, right? It can have its own set of rules, and based on those rules, borrowing and lending out of those assets happen, right? So what is really nice is the fact that the controller itself sets its own risk parameters. It can use any pricing source, or it may decide not to use pricing source at all. It can be simply hard-coded, or you can have this kind of something which became quite popular recently, which is Oracle-less lending protocols, right? Where it works differently. Like you can have, network of keepers and basically different rules when it comes to pricing. You don't need to take them from the single source like Oracle.
Right. Or so like on the Oracle-less one, it would just be like you would just basically. So like, how would an Oracle-less one here work if it was this borrow ETH set USDC?
Well, so as I said, that ETH Vault, it has complete freedom to price both its own asset and all the assets that it accepts as collaterals, right? So in this case, it would be that USDC asset. So basically, in the most naive use case, we would have the collateral vault, just using some kind of price oracle in order to price, in fact, shares of the USDC vault, right? So it first needs to know the exchange rate between the shares token and the USDC that is inside the vault. And then it can also, take some, read from some oracle, right? And based on that, applying also appropriate risk factors, it can determine if your position is over collateralized or it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Sorry. You were going to say something, Doug?
Sure. I guess I think the key thing about the EVC is that it maintains that connection, right? So the important thing is that whenever you want to borrow, you have to register with the EVC that this is my collateral that I'm posting, right? And the EVC keeps that list for your account, right? And then when you want to take out a borrow, it also adds you to another list, right? What happens is that it registers that vault you're borrowing from as your controller, right? So those are the key things that the EVC manages. It's what collaterals you've kind of posted that you're like making available for the purposes of borrowing, and which vault you've actually borrowed from, right? So that relationship is recorded. And the really interesting bit is that to be compliant, like to work in this protocol properly, vaults need to inform the EVC whenever some operation has changed, the balance of a user, right? So in this case, what would happen if you just tried to withdraw your USDC as collateral, right? Well, obviously that should be prevented because that's their securing your loan, right? So in order for the ecosystem to work, that vault has to inform the EVC, this user has moved their funds out, right? And then later on, the EVC will go ask, like at an appropriate time, it'll go ask that controller vault, is this user still sufficiently collateralized, right? Or did they remove too much, right? And if they did, then the transaction gets aborted and everything gets rolled back, right? So that's like the critical relationship that the EVC maintains, those two sets, and also the asking of permission about performing different operations.
Yeah. And the controller is called controller just because of the fact that if you enable it, it controls those assets that you enabled as collaterals, right? So it's up to the controller to seize your assets anytime it sees fit, right? So
like the controller's kind of here, right? He's like
the controller. Not really. So the controller is the ETH Vault itself, right?
Okay. He's in there.
Yeah. The ETH Vault is the controller. Yeah, like that's what you've registered as your controller for an account. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And if that vault controller it sees that your loan is no longer collateralized, it has right to go to the USDC vault through the EVC and seize your collateral, basically. And this is how the liquidation would be enforced.
Yep. So if you were trying to do something with your borrowed ETH, and then it would check before it allowed you to do it. Are you collateralized enough, right?
Yeah, in fact, it checks after. So we have this concept of batching, right? You can batch multiple operations, and only at the end of a batch of operations, we check all those all the accounts that were touched within that batch. They would be checked. All the vaults which were touched within that batch would also be checked. So thanks to that, you can also implement stuff like supply borrow caps and other safety checks for the vault itself, or even check the invariants if they still hold.
Yeah, because I'm guessing too that the reason that you register the collateral is so that way, hopefully you're not posting this as collateral in any other EVC connected vaults, right?
So the way it is enforced is that you can have only one collateral, only one controller at a time, right?
Yep.
So if you can have only one controller at a time, which means that you can only have one borrow at a time, so you cannot use the same collateral to support multiple borrows, right? And so this is the first property that the EVC enforces, and you can use, as long as the controller, accepts multiple collaterals, you can use multiple of them, right? And all of those that you enabled as collateral, the controller will be controlling, right? And later on, when, for example, liquidation happens and those assets need to be seized, the controller calls into the collateral vault through the EVC, so that the collateral vault does not even know that the liquidation is happening, right? So it cannot prevent it. When you submit yourself to the rules of the controller, you need to trust it, right?
Yeah, and then I'm guessing too, like you can you have like one borrow ETH and then you can have multiple collaterals as well?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
like you could have like a USDT one, and we use TRB.
Actually, it's good to mention that it's good that you say TRB, because the thing is that, as long as you find other people which will feel comfortable with TRB being collateral for a given vault, there is nothing stopping you from doing so. So, for example, you as Stellar, you can deploy your own vault where you recognize TRB as collateral, for example, to lend out USDC, right?
Yep.
And you can just deposit USDC there. There will be other people which will come with their TRB, and they can borrow it from you if you feel that this is sufficient collateral, which might be with proper risk management and risk factors like collateral factor of the TRB, for example. It can happen, right? But this is something that was also very hard to achieve with traditional lending protocols, because if something is collateral and it's chosen bad, then basically whole protocol can be put underwater just because of that one wrong collateral, right? And here all the risks are isolated to a single vault which accepts something as a collateral.
Well, I mean, that was a giant issue I know with previous lending markets. As somebody who works with an Oracle, getting oracles on littler coins, you were sort of like limited to very, very big liquid coins because you couldn't find oracles on it. Was that sort of any consideration when you guys were making this system?
Yes, absolutely. So like Kasper was saying, there's no global set of like acceptable oracles or collaterals, like assets that could be as collateral, right? It's kind of up to the vault's discretion, and therefore the risk is contained into the vault too. So the only people that are affected by the risk management decisions of the vault are the depositors in the vault, right? So yeah, absolutely. That means that a vault could be coded to use kind of less common oracles, and it could use certain oracles for certain assets and different oracles for other assets. It's quite flexible like that. In terms of your TRB vault here, one thing I want to call out is that that could actually be coded in two ways, right? it could be coded as what we call a collateral only vault, in which case, the only purpose to deposit into it is to actually take out borrows on, this Ether vault you have here, right?
Right.
But in which case you would be earning no yield on that collateral, right? However, if you did code that TRB vault to allow borrowing, then, in principle, that collateral could also be borrowed out to people at the same time you're using it as collateral, right?
So
and
would
that's
it
kind of one of the,
Would it loop back? So let's say you wanted to take it out, you borrowed here some TRB. Would you use this same USDC collateral vault, or could you? Or would you have to make a new one?
No, you could use the same vault. Yeah, that's a great thing. Is that vaults can be simultaneously controllers and collaterals, right, for different accounts, right? So account A might be using this as a collateral and another as a controller, and account B the opposite, right? That's the kind of great interconnection of it, and I think it's one of the kind of key different features from a lot of these ones we're seeing right now, like for example, Morpho Blue, where everything is just contained and not networked, right? It's kind of giving up one of the big benefits that we had from the compound model, where you could actually earn yield on your deposited collateral, right? Rather than just parking it purely as a collateral, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but that said, you can implement, in fact, any kind of interactions between those vaults, right? Because you can still recreate something like Morpho on top of the EVC, but you can also recreate something like Aave compound or Euler V1 or something in between even, right? So the flexibility here is the king, I would say.
Do you guys, I have to ask, do you see there being like one dominant vault for each asset? Like obviously if there is an ETH vault and it's pretty good, everyone's just going to use that one and it's not going to, do a different one.
That's actually a really good question. I would say in the long run, I wouldn't expect there necessarily to be a dominant one, just because of every vault can implement its own risk management parameters, right? So yes, like there might be, a dominant ETH vault, but people might disagree with what it chooses as collateral, or might want to have, different collateral factor ratios, or, disagree with other implementations, like other attributes of the vault, right? So I think the market, there's a lot of room for different management strategies. So in the long run, I wouldn't expect there to be, one dominant ETH vault necessarily.
Well, I'm guessing there's fees you can put on this thing.
Yes, exactly. So just like a compound of a Euler one, there's a fee taken out of interest, right? So actually, I should say that this is optional. Like, and a vault could be coded to not have any fees, right? But the vault implementations that we'll be publishing allow that, right? So when you configure this, part of the interest that is paid to the vault will be reserved as a fee, right? And there's lots of legitimate reasons for charging fees too, right? Like you can, I think of some vaults might be like actively managed and be changing their collateralization ratios and so on, and that is like a compensation for that work, right? Keeping the vault secure, just like exactly on Aave, for example, has like hundreds and hundreds of governance changes every year, right? So it's a good argument that they're entitled to some kind of fee, the organization, right, for performing that. But that fee is taken out of the interest and then is up to the vault to determine what to do with it. So as you're saying, yeah, vaults could definitely compete on fees, and maybe one vault is charging too high of a fee and you would go to a different vault instead.
You guys could add in payments to those oracles. That would be
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Also, really nice property of the EVC is the fact that it does not enforce any fees, right? So we, Euler Labs, we are building Euler V2 on top of the EVC, right? Which is that public good unopinionated layer. And for our vaults and vaults that will be deployed using our factory, yes, there will be some fees, right? But in fact, if you feel comfortable enough to deploy your own protocol or your own product on top of the EVC, you can do it, right? And you can compete on those fees.
Yeah. No, I mean, I could see like You could see like YOLO strategies of like somebody comes in and has like, minimal collateral ratios, minimal fees, just trying to vampire attack a bunch of other protocols. It would be cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen. It will happen, in fact, because if something can happen, it will happen. Always.
Well, I wanted to ask you guys too. So, one of the considerations I know with a lot of lending markets is whether the liquidity on a lot of these is enough to support it. So, like if you had like probably the one in this one would obviously be the TRB piece. So, like if you're borrowing ETH and putting it, into with TRB, and TRB drops in price really fast, but there's no liquidity anywhere to sell it. Is there any consideration for liquidity in these pools as far as like, how much of it can be like sort of this, I think some people have called it like sort of toxic, liquidity as far as like it's over collateralized because like you can't even sell it for what the price is actually.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge concern. And when you're setting the collateralization factor for an asset, that should be a prime consideration, right? Like a very long tail asset, might have, a high marginal price for, buying or selling like 0.000001 of the asset, right? But obviously there would be a giant price impact if you tried to do a big trade, right? So
right.
that should definitely be a big consideration. If we want to get into the nuts and bolts of the oracles,
Sure.
This is not actually required by the EVC, but we've actually come up with another spec called the price oracle interface. So we just call it like iPriceOracle.sol Solidity, right?
Ooh, perfect.
And I don't think we've published this yet, but it's something we're kind of like working on. And one of the things that it does is that we think actually it's better to, rather than query for the price of something, to actually kind of like simulate a conversion, right?
Yeah.
So rather than calling the price and saying, okay, what's the price of Ether USDC, and it gives you some fraction. No, instead you say, I want to convert, 7,020 USDCs into Ether. How much am I going to get, right? And the nice thing about that is that quote can incorporate the price impact, right? Because it's exactly. It's simulating the trade. Yeah. And the other interesting bit is that you can actually get back two numbers, right? If you were buying USDC, this amount of USDC, this is how much Ether it would take. And if you were selling, how much you would get, right? And so you get the bid and the ask of those prices, right? Because like conceptually, there's no such thing, like it doesn't really make sense to talk about the single price of an asset, Ether, USDC, whatever, right? Like
right.
a pair of assets, ETH, USDC, right? Because you will always get a different price depending on whether you're buying or selling, right? And the reason for that is if the same price was quoted for the buyer and the seller, then a trade would happen, right? And that those like people that were quoting those same prices would go away, right? Leaving a gap between the bid and the ask of the price, right? So even just logically, it always makes sense to talk about two different prices, a bid and an ask, right? And the difference between them is commonly called the price spread, right? So the iPrice Oracle interface actually allows you to get the bid and the ask separately, right? So the idea is that you might, while you're getting the price of the collateral asset, assume that the interesting thing about this is when you sell it, right? You're gonna have to get the price when you sell the collateral asset. So you'll use the bid, right? And that will be lower than the ask, right? So in this case, that would incorporate the liquidity, right? Just purely getting the price of this, because you would get a lower, you're not getting the marginal price, right? That's the price if you're buying 0.000001, but instead you're getting the price, post price impact of your simulated trade, right?
Right.
And then similarly on the other side for the liability, you would take the other side, right? Because you're going to have to be buying that on the market, right? So you have to assume it has the higher price.
Well, that's what. So, like in the borrow ETH, put TRB as collateral. Let's say you wanted to borrow, $100 worth of ETH, but there was only $50 worth of liquidity on the Uniswap pool that you're getting it from. I'm guessing, right? So then it would not allow you. You could say like, we're not allowing you to borrow that much because the collateral's just not there.
Absolutely, that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
So the iPrice Oracle interface doesn't actually mandate Uniswap in any way. It's totally Oracle agnostic, and we've tried to make it so that it could support pretty much any Oracle. But yeah, absolutely. If there was very, very limited buy side liquidity for the TRB, then you would, for your what you think, like whatever your collateral was, I think you said 100 or something,
right?
Maybe you would only get like $5 worth, right? after trading, right? So in that case, that would only allow you to borrow $5 worth of the asset, right? Even though amount of TRB times the marginal price is much higher than 5, right? That's not shouldn't be used under the assumption that you can actually get that amount in a liquidation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question would be like, how would it work in a liquidation scenario for this one? So let's say, you borrowed ETH and you put in say 100 TRB over there, but then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the pool goes down in volume. So just the volume of TRB just for whatever reason cuts in half. Can you now, like, even if the price doesn't move, just the volume did, can you now liquidate that asset if it doesn't have enough to support it?
So it depends on how the vault is coded. Yeah. And if it did just like what I said there about purely using the bid as the actual collateralization ratio, then yeah, in theory that could allow liquidation, right? But actually, I think that's not necessarily a great way to code a vault, just because, as you said, if liquidity is just pulled out, then that could cause a liquidation itself, right? So I think one way to code a vault that might be a bit better is to actually use what they call the midpoint, right? That's like halfway between the bid ask, and use that to determine the health of a position, right? That way, a big temporary increase in the spread of the bid ask will not cause a liquidation, right? However, it will impact newly created borrows, right? I think that might be a bit better way to do it, right? So when the liquidity is really wide, then newly created ones will not actually be affected.
Well, I mean, this is the problem we have in the Oracle world right now, is that all of the new assets that are coming up, as far as people want to use them in lending protocols and everything like that, for whatever reason, Binance isn't listing anything anymore. So there's literally like a Uniswap pool. And that's like it. And so like, it's like, listen, that is the price source we have. It might be on a different chain, but it's like, it gets really hard as far as like telling people, okay, how much should you allow people to borrow given liquidity? And it's cool you guys are thinking about that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify again, though, that is actually separate from the EVC, and that's like a separate thing we're researching and not actually required for the EVC. The EVC doesn't mandate the pricing. But yeah, let's just step through your scenario with the liquidation there, because I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Like Kasper was saying, when you go in to actually create to take out a borrow, you are submitting yourself to the controller, right? Like you're basically giving you could call it temporary control over your account until you repay back the loan, right? And this is actually the same kind of concept as when you do a regular borrow, like a borrow on Aave or Compound, right? You're basically locking in all of your collaterals until you repay the loan, right? Or you're at least you're allowing that system to determine how much collateral you can take out, right? So that's really the key thing. That's why we're doing the controller. And like Kasper said, the EVC is responsible for tracking those sets and also allows the collateral vault to kind of impersonate you, right? So in this case where a liquidation happens, the controller actually goes to the EVC and says, okay, I'm going to pretend to be this user that's now in violation, and I want to actually withdraw from the collateral vault. And then typically what the controller will do is go and take that collateral, sell it on the market, right? And use it to buy back the borrowed asset to repay the loan, right? And whatever is left over, like wasn't required to purchase that borrowed asset, is left over for the violating account, right? So that's like the whole flow.
Yep.
And then whenever the liability goes to zero, the vault will the controller vault will release the account from its control. So
Cool.
that's the whole flow of the liquidation.
I'm guessing you guys have like the same Euler liquidation mechanisms, or is that custom as well?
It's very similar from Euler V1 in the vault that we're proposing. But again, yeah, a vault could implement something completely different if they wanted to.
Okay.
But this actually, since we don't have too much time left, there's a lot of other cool features of the EVC, and this sort of leads into one of them. Like I said, the EVC handles a lot of the authentication sort of work for the vaults. So there's that one example where controllers can kind of like impersonate you. But there's also this really cool feature called operators, where you can register another contract as being able to impersonate you. And there's a lot of reasons why you might want to do that. But one of them might be like a position manager kind of account, right? Or like smart contract that under certain price conditions, for example, it could close your trade, right? So, in like the regular like CeFi world and a lot of trading platforms, I'm sure people are familiar with, there's these things called stop loss order modifiers. And the idea is that, whenever the price of your assets goes against you to a certain degree, it closes your trade for you, right? Like it actually does what we were saying is withdraw the collateral, swap that into the liability asset, and repay the loan on your behalf, right?
So that would be if you were going to get liquidated at 1,000, you would put a stop loss at 1,100 and say, if that happens, close me out rather than let me get liquidated.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yep.
So in fact, you can code those operators to be competitive with the regular liquidation flows, right? So you can opt into something that would be just better for you in terms of, for example, liquidation fee that you need to pay, right? So there are other people like from the community which can code those operators because it's completely permissionless. It's just some external smart contract that user can enable on the EVC to act on their behalf. And for example, you can enable custom liquidation flows, right? Which are cheaper than whatever is implemented in the controller vault.
Right. Yeah. So like if there was some really egregious liquidation logic, you could put like the Euler V1 logic on top and be like, this is in my operator.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can do that.
Another really interesting use case is you could actually use different oracles for your liquidations than the vault is using, right? Because the liquidation, like the operator level, quote unquote liquidation, actually what I think is better called a stop loss, that is kind of an agreement between you and whoever your operator is invoked by, right? Like a keeper network, right? So that's entirely separate from the vault. And you could use entirely different oracle pricing, right? Like if you have a much faster oracle, you could use that to execute your stop losses before like the slower oracle by the vault actually catches up, right?
So you could have a completely centralized oracle. It's all cool. Even if this one's decentralized, this one's just your own JavaScript bot that you're running and call it a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be totally arbitrary, right? It could be like close me out after 2 days, no matter what, right? Like, and also the other way is if the price goes in your favor, it could be coded to close you out too, right? That's like what we call a take profit. And then there's a whole bunch of other variations like trailing stops, where actually the stop loss level is adjusted as the price goes in your favor, right? So that you can get the benefit of a take profit, but also not close yourself out if it's a wild swing in your favor, right? So take all of that profit. So that's operators, really, really powerful feature. There's also what we call permit, which is like a mechanism to create signed orders off chain, like using the 712 spec. Like the idea behind that is that you can do gasless trades, right? You can create some kind of like a batch. We didn't really get into batches, but it's basically like a multi-call invocation.
Yeah.
And sign it off chain, and then get someone else to execute it on your behalf, right? So I think there's a lot of potential there too.
There's just every feature in these things. It's awesome.
And maybe for consistency, let's also mention sub-accounts, because this is also something very important. So if you remember, I said that you can have only one controller enabled at a time, right? Which means that you can borrow only one asset. And it would not be convenient, because if without sub-accounts, it would basically mean that you have one Ethereum account and you can have only one borrow, right? So that's why we borrowed from from Euler V1. And on EVC, we also implemented that sub-account system, which means that every single Ethereum address, it has 256 sub-accounts. So it's very easy for you, having just one private key to have 256 sub-accounts, which means that you can interact with multiple vaults. You can set up multiple positions, at the same time. And what is also cool is that you can, combine it with the batching feature. So, within one transaction, you can set up multiple positions at once, and only at the end, those health checks that we mentioned will be triggered.
So it would super cool. Yeah, I mean, with like 10 minutes left, what I know we were like listing off features here at the back end. Anything else we sort of missed? Anything big or any use cases that you guys are really excited to that we could maybe go over?
Well, one last thing I would say is the batches, right? So I like to think of the EVC as kind of like a glorified multi-call. So I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with multi-calls, where you kind of just invoke the same contract or multiple contracts multiple times within the same transaction, right? So if you wanted to do a deposit over here and then a swap over here and then a withdraw from here, rather than sending like 3 separate transactions, like clicking confirm 3 times in MetaMask, you bundle this up in one transaction and send it, and then a smart contract executes those 3 things on your behalf, right? There's a bunch of advantages of that. Number one, it might be cheaper in terms of gas, just because some of those like reads and writes are amortized. But even more importantly is that it happens atomically, right? Like all of those transactions are going to go through, or none of them will. And nothing else can sneak in the middle of those, right? That's just like a standard multi-call. EVC, I would say, takes this even just a little bit one step further. It does all of that. But it can actually interact with any contract. Like some multi-calls are written so they can only call the same contract multiple times, but this is like a general purpose multi-call. But even more importantly is that all of those conditions we talked about with EVC, about checking in a vault to see that it hasn't violated the kind of the agreement of collateral, all of that happens at the end of a batch, right? So you can kind of like transiently violate those requirements as long as you solve them and settle out by the end of the batch, right? And one of the great things about that is that there's no need to like loop your deposits to set up a leveraged position, right?
Right.
You can just borrow from a liability vault, even though you don't have a sufficient collateral to sustain that borrow. Swap it into a collateral and then deposit it, right? And at the end of all of those operations, you will have satisfied the requirement, right? So there's no need to do that like constant looping or take out expensive flash loans on other platforms. It's kind of just built in. We call it like a kind of flash liquidity system. You could think of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely see this, like, assuming, you're going to have this giant spider web of all of these assets out in the wild. And it's sort of, I love it because like even if you just have a bunch of people passively in the vaults, there's just going to be tons of opportunities, like just as prices move against each other. So like the volume on this thing is going to like go through the roof, just the more assets you get in. So it's like, it's similar to like Uniswap, how you don't even need active traders, just like passive liquidity is going to lead to tons of just trading volume on this and opportunities for people, which is cool.
Yeah, we really hope it's going to build an ecosystem. And we think that, like the pie is so big that, Euler is going to build a really cool vault system on top of this. Euler Labs will, and then they'll be up to, the DAO to operate it or whatever. But also other products, like entirely unrelated, could set up shop and build their own lending platforms on this, and everything will just kind of seamlessly work together. That's kind of our goal.
Yeah, so I mean, like I obviously see like the easy one you could, not easy, but like a multi-collateral stable coin, totally do this off of a bunch of vaults. So Euler's building a stable coin now. Is that the rumor?
Well, I don't know about that, but certainly the system supports building stable coins. Yes.
Yeah. Kasper?
Yeah, I mean, what I really wanted to mention is that it's that concept is that cool interconnected liquidity layer, right? And basically, you don't need to convince people to move their assets around once they deposit them into given vault, right? you can have other vaults which just tap into that liquidity if they trust those vaults, and basically that liquidity can be reused, all around the EVC ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I guess one last question, is there what's sort of your roadmap, or how do you see this interacting in sort of a cross-chain world? I know this is all sort of on one ecosystem. Do you see it eventually being expanded to multiple chains?
Well, nothing is stopping the EVC from being deployed on, other chains as long as they are EVM compatible. And I think that it will happen. So, our main focus right now is on Ethereum network, but for sure, at some point we will deploy EVC on other networks. In fact, it's permissionless. It can be deployed by others too, because there is no concept of governance or admin of the EVC. So it would be as simple as deploying it somewhere else. And yes, you can use bridges and.
Would there ever be a way?
As well?
Would there ever be a way to have like a vault on Polygon connected into the Ethereum EVC? Or could that ever work?
Yeah, I think in principle it's possible, right? Because sometimes bridged assets are exposed as tokens on another chain, right? So if those assets were themselves 4626 compatible vaults that use the EVC, then in principle, yes, it could. There's still a lot of outstanding questions about this, security-wise and otherwise. So I don't want to say that's like around the corner, but it's something we're thinking about.
Yeah. What I think is really hard also here is atomicity, right? So with bridges, you don't have that feature. And kind of with lending, atomicity is, much needed. So for example, as we said, you can defer, for example, liquidity check of an account until the end of the batch, right? But it's still one atomic transaction, right? List of operations, and those checks happen at the end. And with bridges and multi-chain operations, this is something that is really hard to go around.
Cool. So when is this live for you guys? And where can people find out more?
So we still have to release some of the actual vaults that implement these things. If people are interested, the EVC is itself available at evc.wtf, and along with all the documentation. And there are some relatively simple vaults called the playground vaults that do implement this. So there's kind of a little playground testing area that we can experiment with. At ETH Denver at the end of February, we're going to be doing kind of a workshop about the EVC and getting into some of the actual implementation details of it. And then, later this year, we'll have a full launch of our system. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No, I'm super excited now, and I'm excited to see you guys out at ETH Denver. But yeah, thanks, Doug. Thanks, Kasper. This was an awesome time.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Nick.